The world's looking for an antidote to the coronavirus. Scientists are trying their very best to come up with some type of solution to the disease that's out here. Now, is there an antidote? Well, that remains to be seen. But when we understand some of the basic things that relate to disease, there's a couple of interesting biblical connections. So far, people tend to go to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And so we look at that, and that fourth horseman is disease. Well, is it religious fanaticism that would lead us that way? Or is there any basis in recognizing there is a connection between honoring God and obeying God and, in this case, disease? Or how about false religion, that first horse? How about war? How about famine? Are there any connections, spiritually speaking? I believe there are. Now, we're not at the time of the end, and the coronavirus is not that pale horse. There's a lot more that has to happen before we get there. But one thing we should take note of is this connection to these horses and the idea that there are severed relationships between man and God. That's the whole idea. When you look at those four seals, those four horsemen, they're a result of man's broken relationship with God. We can read about that back in the Old Testament. When God was giving instructions to his people, it said a couple of interesting things. Back in the book of Deuteronomy, when you look at what Deuteronomy has to say about broken relationships and their relationship with God, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, we can begin in verse 15. And here's what God tells his people. He says, "It shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, his statutes that I command you today, that all these curses will come upon you." And then Deuteronomy begins to list those curses. So what is the cause? A broken relationship with God, an unwillingness to recognize God's supremacy in their life. In fact, down a little bit farther, in verse 21, it says, "The Lord will make the plague cling to you until he's consumed you from the land which you're going to possess." So in this case, we see a direct connection between pestilence, disease, plagues, and this relationship with God. Oversimplified? I don't think so. If we look on the other hand, take a look at what it says in Exodus chapter 15, verse 26. You want the antidote? Exodus begins to talk about that. Exodus 15:26 says, "If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what's right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep his statutes, I'll put none of these diseases on you which I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." You see, there is an antidote to man's lack of a connection with God. And that's turning our lives around, recognizing who is supreme in life, who has control, who is watching over us. It's the great creator of the universe. And if we're going to be right with God, we recognize the fact that he is in charge, and we need to be close to him. And so when we recognize that very fact, God is going to bring this whole world to recognize man needs a relationship with God. And this is just a precursor to that point where God is going to allow the world to almost destroy itself. But yet, God will intervene. And that's the good news. There is a solution. There is an antidote. There's a fifth horseman that will come, and that's Jesus Christ. And that white horse, he will ride in and establish truth and justice, and certainly will have peace, prosperity, and there will be health. And so the great thing is we have an opportunity to do that right now. We can turn to God. We can secure a relationship with him. We can identify who is supreme in our life. And when we begin to do that, we can see that God will continue to work in our lives and bring us into a healthy relationship with him. So let's turn to God. Let's make sure that that relationship is secure. And when we do that, I think we have the best antidote of all. That's BT Daily. We'll see you next time.